with the likes of NVIDIA, other tech names in the Magnificent Seven driving the NASDAQ and the S&P to record highs. Some of the best trades this year tied to the market are ETFs. And you even saw that those single name ETFs led to the best returns for ETFs focused on those single names. I'm talking the likes of Tesla and NVIDIA. The reason I bring that up is because it's been fascinating to see just the boom in single stock listed ETFs. So many investors I've spoken with this year have talked about how weird it is to buy a stock via an ETF instead of just owning the stock itself. But more broadly, wanted to point to a couple of stats that we've been talking about, Seana. $1 trillion poured into ETFs over the last year. U.S. equities are king when it comes to those ETF inflows. We've seen significant inflows into ETFs that are tracking the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, and global demand for those ETFs also hitting records, continuing to add to this idea of U.S. exceptionalism and the idea that stocks that are listed on U.S. averages are really the ones that are going to continue to rally moving forward.
Yeah, and I think when you take a look at some of those fund flows and what exactly that tells us, clearly a lot of the excitement there pointing to technology, that sector at large. And then when you take a look at the individual movers, obviously Tesla has been a huge winner as of late. NVIDIA, you might think it is the top performer here in the S&P 500. We've talked about it so much, certainly has been a driving factor here in this bull market. But when you compare that performance to other names of the S&P, it was actually the second top performer. You may even say third if you want to factor in Palantir. Palantir did join the S&P halfway through the year, so a bit of a caveat there. But again, this just points to that concentration, Maddie, that you've been talking about within the market, and where many of these gains, why we have seen these gains, or why we have seen some of that excitement play out. When you take a look even at Vistra, when you take a look at NVIDIA, obviously the big factor there is AI, and the AI momentum has certainly carried a lot of that excitement this year. We've seen that not only play out in these individual funds, but we've also seen it play out in exchange traded funds in ETFs. And I think the question going forward is what exactly that growth rate is going to look like. And of course, when you take a look at earnings growth expectations, yes, we are expecting to see another strong year, but again, a bit of a cooling here when you compare it to some of the growth that we did see this year. So again, how big of a factor that's going to be in those future gains is something that Wall Street obviously is still trying to figure out at this point, and only time is going to tell.
Well, and it's fascinating too when you look at flows into some of the little bit more speculative assets. The last thing I want to bring up is the BlackRock Bitcoin fund becoming the greatest launch in ETF history over the course of 2024 in just 11 months, because we don't have the final month data yet. It grew to more than $50 billion in assets. No ETF has ever had a better debut than that BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. So interesting to see that going up alongside the broader S&P 500, more traditional ETFs. Interesting question to watch in terms of whether or not there's a little bit of froth out there, or if we'll just continue to see more gains across the board in 2025.